Welcome to the Author Studio podcast. I'm Mira Landry,
This is Mark Stevens.
and we are your craft and publishing focused author discussions here to enrich your writing journey. With us today, we have Rachel Horak Dempsey, who's going to talk about her novella, PNOKO. Am I saying that right?
PNOKO.
PNOKO, so you don't pronounce it.
Nope. If you said it fast over and over again, Pinocchio, 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 it starts. Yeah.
That's amazing. Rachel Horak Dempsey is the author of the novella PNOKO, a sci-fi horror retelling of Pinocchio. She has been published by Triquarterly, Creepy Pod, Brigade's Gate Press, 20 Bellows, Pushcart nominated in 2024, Stars and Sabers, and others. Rachel is also the author of the anthology Horizons 2 from 20 Bellows. She currently serves on the executive boards of Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers and Women in Horror Arts and Media Association. Rachel holds a BFA in Drama and English from NYU, a Master's in Journalism from Georgetown, and an MFA in Creative Writing from Regis University in Denver, where she lives with her family. Rachel is also a dear friend of mine and also often comes on the Writers Who Read podcast with Gary and Whitney and I. So welcome. Thank you so much for being our first guest.
Thank you so much. I'm honored, truly. This was one of the first organizations that I connected with moving from the East Coast 10 years ago. So it's always wonderful to give back and dive deeper into this community.
Can
Awesome.
I
Well,
quickly add one more credit to Rachel's resume? I think that everybody knows she is just ubiquitous out there at book events all over, writing conferences. She just shows up. She's just there and just a big supporter in the community. So that's how a lot of folks know Rachel, and she just adds so much to every event.
Thank you. No one's chased me off yet.
it's funny, we're going to have you here to talk about pacing in novellas, which I think is a wonderful topic, but I feel like we could have you back on to talk about marketing and all the things you do to promote your book. You are like a wealth of wisdom when it comes to self-promotion and putting yourself out there and really getting people excited about your novel. And I just think that's amazing. And I've loved every single thing you've put together, and hearing you talk and being interviewed and everyone you've included in all of this is just such a vote for community and everything that you know how to bring. So yes, definitely.
Appreciate that. I lack in the technology space, which is part of why I wrote a novella about how I'm terrified of technology. So I have to make up for it in real life. I have to connect with people because I don't know how to market online, as well as, thank goodness, my publishers. They do know. So I let them handle that part, and I show up in real life. And that's my theater background. So
we're going to dive into PNOKO in a minute. Sorry, we're going to dive into PNOKO in a minute. Some strings were never meant to be cut. Joseph Zimmerman Jr. has spent his life in the shadow of his father's genius. But when their sentient robot goes rogue, Joseph must stand between his creation and everyone and everything he holds dear. That is quite a log line. Do you want to? I know you have, I obviously know a lot about your background of how you decided to write this book and where it came from. But why don't you tell the audience?
yes, I think it's kind of a unique situation. I had never set out to write a novella. I have many short stories published, and I always have a novel in progress, and I currently am working on one, but I had never sat down and thought, I want to write a novella. So I actually was commissioned to write this. It is part of a series. They're all standalone, but they share the commonality is that they're all retellings of fairy tales or folk tales. And so Andre at M4L approached me and asked if I would contribute a volume to the series. And I was flattered and also kind of flabbergasted and overwhelmed. But I said yes, because that's one of my life philosophies is if I'm afraid of a thing, that probably means I should do it at least once. So I said yes. I signed a contract I did not have a single word written. And then Andre came back. I think it was weeks, maybe a month later, and said, actually, one of the other authors in the series has signed a two-book deal and is not going to be able to make his original deadline when you consider switching with him. And I have to say, because I've told this story a number of times, and Andre's like, Rachel, you have to tell them I didn't say you had to. Like, you could still keep your original contract. You said yes, you didn't have to. So he did give me the option. I had an 18-month contract and I dropped down to 6 months. So I wrote the novella in 6 months, which again was a challenge and terrifying. But I've also told many people this. I procrastinate, but I don't miss deadlines. So however long you tell me I have to do a thing is how long it will take me to do a thing. So when it was 18 months, it would have taken me 18 months. When it was 6 months, I got it done in 6 months. So all of that to say, I didn't have a lot of time to ponder what I wanted to write about. So it was a list of stories that exist in the public domain that I was to choose from. And I first gravitated towards Little Red Riding Hood because werewolves, horror. And then I just realized there's a lot of Little Red Riding Hood retellings. So I was going down the list, and the title, which is I learned is called Leet Speak. I didn't know that term before, but when you use numbers in place of letters, like in a license plate, it's called Leet Speak. So that was the first thing that came to mind when I looked at that list was, oh, I could do something interesting with the name. And then, oh, that would be a robot. So what would it stand for? Prototype number 0K0. Okay, that means there have to be prototype number A, B, C, and that's sort of the seed that it all grew from, or the spark, I guess would be a better electronic metaphor to use.
That's incredible. I love it. I feel like we're going to talk about how you actually paced the novella, but I feel like there's a lot to talk about in how you actually paced your writing of the novella within this.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was I'm not typically a write for many hours straight in a day kind of writer, mostly because I have three children. So I don't get large chunks of time. When they're in school, it's a little better right now in the summer. It's kind of rough. But I had to write in long chunks because getting into the creative space and pulling out and getting in, that kind of pacing wasn't going to work for a 6 month deadline. And one of the things that really saved my life in this process was spending time at Ragdale and really writing for 8 hours a day, a couple of those days made all the difference. And then being able to do that consecutively several days in a row.
For those who don't know, what's Ragdale?
It is a writer retreat. It's a nonprofit based just outside of Chicago. I wish I could remember how long they've been there, but it's significant. They've been there for a long time, and it's a community. They do various things, but what they're most known for, I believe, is that opportunity to go on retreat. And there's different lengths that you can go for, and um, the longer ones are the most prestigious, obviously, because you're being taken care of for that amount of time to step outside of your regular life and be fed and nurtured intellectually and emotionally and all the things. And the house is beautiful, the land is beautiful. I love being in community with other writers. So I met some really amazing artists in my time there. And if you have the resources, both financially to be able to step aside from your day job or your family, your pets, all those things, I highly recommend it.
And just real quickly, I'm wondering about the constraints since we're going to talk about novellas. What were the word length kind of parameters that you were given?
So specifically from my publisher, and I know there's some wiggle room there, they really wanted at least 30,000 words, and they went up to 40,000. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of the sweet spot. So I ended up just over the halfway point of that, over 35,000 creeping up towards 40,000, I believe, by the time I got all my edits in.
Is this the first novella you've written?
It is. Yeah. It was I'm gonna say it was a little uncomfortable in the way that I also struggle with longer short stories. It feels like it should either be longer or shorter. It's sort of an awkward, like adolescent length for me. Um, but I think a lot of that was just in my head because when I actually sat down to write it, I think I realized, maybe part of what I've struggled with writing full-length novels is that I'll worry that I don't have enough words and I'll start to put things in there that are kind of superfluous or redundant and not having that luxury. Maybe it's the same thing as procrastinating. If you only tell me I have 40,000 words, then I have to get to the damn point. And so this kept me honest about hopefully trimming any excess and the stuff that's left in there is just stuff that has to be in there. So I don't know. Maybe I'll sort of keep in mind when I write my novel that I'm working on now, write it as if it were a novella, and then I can add where it really needs it, where it really warrants it.
Well, I know you've written a full-length novel already, and you've written a number of short stories, obviously, Pushcart nominee. How do you feel the pacing particularly changes between each of those forms?
That's a great question. Um, Short story, really, I feel like there is, I mean, a lot of people say this about regardless what length you're writing, but there is no room for throat clearing in a short story. You better know exactly where that inciting incident is and exactly how quickly you have to move from point to point and then have a banger ending, really stick the landing at the end. I do think that's true of anything, but it seems more merciless in short story writing that if you don't nail the beginning and you don't nail the ending, you're not making it out of the slush pile. Even the first line in a short story. And now, having experienced from the editor side as well, I know that's true. That if it took me a couple of lines or a couple of paragraphs to either understand what was happening or to feel invested, it's out because I know that's what happens from a reader perspective. I'm just going to skip over that one in an anthology if I'm like, nope, I'm confused or I just don't care. So that those bookends of the story feel even more urgent in short storytelling. And then I'd say if there's a spectrum, you get a little more space in a novella, but not much. I don't think you get a first chapter to hook a reader. I think you probably get a first page, maybe. So there is a sense of urgency in the hooks.
That's
So,
great. And you talked a, oh,
but
go ahead.
just real quick, I'm wondering, based on what you're saying there, I'm kind of inferring that you don't outline, you go in to write and see how it's going.
I wish I outlined more. I really do. I've tried so many different styles and I feel like I'm fighting my brain. So what I actually did with PNOKO, because I knew I didn't have the luxury of burning down multiple versions over time, I really sort of had to get it right the first one or two times. I did use Dan Harmon's story circle, story wheel. And somehow I think the circle, my brain liked that more than a linear list or a graph. I really don't like graphs. I think that goes back to my fear of technology. There's something in it that feels very restrictive to me. So the circle felt more free. And then for those listeners who aren't as familiar with this story wheel, there are kind of like pie wedges, and each wedge has a section of the opening image, essentially, to borrow from Save the Cat, writes a novel lingo. There's an opening image, but he wants something. And then there's obstacles. And the first top half of the wheel is order, and the bottom half of the wheel is chaos. So you're moving from the known world to an unknown situation, growing through it, and returning to the real world or the previous life or the hometown or whatever it is, a changed person with new information. So I did use that, and that helped immensely. I'm going to try it again with the novel. Yeah, I if you I am always open to new outline ideas. Every time there's a conference, I if there's a workshop on outlining, I go. And usually I'm like, nope, 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 nope. But I'll always try.
When you talk about using that circle, do you feel like you, as you were writing, you wrote to the sort of next phase in mind, or do you actually sit down and like pre-write out where you were going to go in those phases?
I wrote the whole I filled the whole circle before I started plotting. So
So
that
you
did
did it, you advanced outlined exactly like that.
it, yes.
Yeah.
Uh, and generally, I feel like I have, regardless of what the length, maybe flash fiction, I don't really do that much at all. It's usually just an image or an idea, some kind of premise, and then I just kind of write it. And if it doesn't work, you've only wasted an hour. You can go back and rewrite. But with longer pieces, I will have an idea of where it starts, sort of an image or an idea of where it begins, and definitely how it ends. That sometimes changes, frequently changes, often more than the beginning. I usually have found that I know where a story starts and then I can discover where it ends. And like a lot of you listening, I'm sure it's the murky middle that really is when I'm like, why aren't I an outliner? This would be so much easier.
I'm going to segue that into our pacing again. The murky middle. So, how do you feel you used your pacing technique? So, I think you kind of mentioned you did a few things like showing versus telling, backstories, flashbacks, transitions, etc. So, in that murky middle, which I know a lot of authors struggle when they're first writing their books, like how do you get through that section as you know how you're starting, you know how you're ending. What are some of those pacing techniques that you can use to kind of keep the story flowing, whether that's like a larger structure thing or like more nitty gritty line level details?
Absolutely. I think from a larger structure standpoint, the thing that saved my life was really focusing on the law of causality. And that was something that was missing from some of my earlier works. I didn't understand that it's not just this happened and then this happened and then this happened. It's this happened, therefore this happens over and over and over. So the domino effect really helped me think about how to plot this story as I was moving through it.
I
And
think that's like a great way to think about like as you keep the momentum moving, like when you can feel the next piece about to fall. And I think you did a really great job in PNOKO with that. Like every single scene that was kind of building up, you're all of a sudden realizing how this, is going to build into the next catastrophe or the next set of stress points or, what consequences are going to befall the characters as you kind of build.
I'm glad that that was
You
effective.
did a great job. Yeah.
Did
I
you
think
did you did you start out knowing I think I counted 25 chapters. It's 136 or 135 pages. You have four parts. So you have all these nice quick staccato kind of breaks, which really for me just made the reader feel satisfied that you were making progress. There was cool stuff going on, and it just sort of set up a sprint for the reader. Did you know going in that that's how you were going to approach it?
no, I don't think I did. I there were a lot of things that surprised me in writing this story. I've tried to write a dual POV novel and it's hard. So to do it in a novella, I was like, "Ugh, is this wise? Should I do this?" Um, but it was helpful in keeping the pacing because I could sort of do smash cuts, really, like to borrow from cinematic language. I could cut away from one POV and move forward in time, jump forward in time. I also could use that from a horror perspective to build some dread. You know what's happening in the other POV, so you're like, something bad's coming, and this character doesn't know it yet. Or on the other hand, to sort of not pump the brakes, but just ease up a little bit. And especially in those really intense scenes, to sort of give the reader a moment to relax. So it wasn't completely relentless to the point where you're either numbed out or exhausted by trying to figure out all the action. That it was an opportunity to, oh, okay, this character's having a quieter moment here, so I can ease into that. Um, there was another part of your question that,
The four parts, I mean,
oh, yeah.
just, yeah. How did that sort itself out? Deciding to take 135 pages and making it four parts.
I think it really did come down to identifying where those smash cuts
Yeah.
were. It was the point where I didn't need to show. So part one ends with well, I don't want to give too much away, but a prototype and the creator have a altercation. And the assistant, Anne, is there as well. So it's solidifying their relationship, and they have essentially another call to action that we have to figure out how to fix this prototype. I didn't need to show the actual process of fixing that first prototype. In a novel length work, I could have done that, but in a novella, I felt like there's an easy place where I can condense the timeline and then immediately go to showing the perspective of the prototype, many prototypes down the line. That also gave me the opportunity to leave some mystery about what happened in between that space. Where are the other prototypes? What happened to them? Are they good or bad prototypes? So I hopefully effectively used those section breaks to build suspense, to leave some room for mystery.
Love it.
I also
Um,
I also noticed that you pulled in pieces of backstory, not necessarily in flashbacks, in like certain orders. Did you feel like that was really purposeful in impacting your pacing and like the overall just what information the reader was getting? Like how did you kind of consider that stuff?
Yeah, I feel like I don't know if you two agree, but a lot of writers that I talk to, flashbacks are tricky. They can be really effective, or they can feel sort of just like filler, and actually can pull a reader out of the story if you're not really sure why you're getting that flashback, or if it just sets more of a mood. Again, I think if you have 80,000, 100,000 words, then it's useful to use flashbacks for building character or relationship or things like that. But I really had to hold myself to the standard of it can do those things, but it does also need to move the plot forward. So that's why I chose to give most of the flashbacks, at least throughout until the end, to Pinocchio, because it could show him learning about being human, what are memories, what is trauma. It was also, again, I'm not going to spoil too much, but there's some clues in there as using flashbacks to sprinkle in some clues about what he is exactly, where his memories come from, and those kinds of things. So I did have to be kind of rigid with myself and say, if it's not doing at least two things in terms of plot, character, setting, mood, then there's no room for it.
That's great. I also think a lot of people listening to this might think, oh, it's just a lot of action. They're just sort of getting a flavor for it. What I was surprised is how much interiority there is, even with all of that. You really develop an interior presence and so smoothly. I guess I don't really have a question here, but I was just surprised at being drawn along. I think it goes back to that causality because we really follow the logic.
I'm glad. That was a challenge, writing a character that's not human. So I wanted to make sure, not that I'm worried about insulting robots. I'm not. I don't know that they can be insulted. And frankly, I don't care. I wrote this partly to insult robots. So But that was another surprise for me was I started this novella believing that Pinocchio is the big bad villain. And again, no spoilers, mini spoiler. There are bigger villains. He does terrible things, but there are bigger villains. So that was a surprise to me in that I discovered in the writing. And some of that came from really putting myself in his synthetic skin and walking in his robot feet and going, oh, wow, he is the way he is because of who he was created by and the world that he's been put into and the modeling that he's seeing around him. So, in order to get into his synthetic skin, it was kind of an out of body experience to pause in my everyday life for 6 months there and go, what about human behavior is odd, to a robot or an alien or whatever, somebody who didn't know, who hadn't grown up with these so-called norms, what would seem strange. And some of that wasn't as much of a stretch for me as I would have thought. Being a neurodivergent person, I think being a person right now in the world can feel sort of like, what is happening? Especially being an artist, someone who's trained and has the sensitivity to pause and ponder and look at human behavior. Yeah, it was a challenge, and yet in many ways, not as challenging as maybe I even wish it had been.
I think it's interesting, and I've having heard you talk about this before. In writing a book about a robot, you really wrote about what it means to be human. I mean, you have so many amazing themes that like stretch throughout, but that is such a question that, or I feel like an exploration that comes up in this book. Did you intend that, or did that just kind of come up?
I think I knew that was coming. A few readers have mentioned to me that they think it's almost as much a Frankenstein retelling as it is a Pinocchio retelling. And
Oh, I could see that.
as a horror lover, I'm not upset about that. And it definitely came into mind because there's a laboratory, there's a mad scientist, there's a creator and a creation. So I think that was always kind of in the back of my mind that this is really a story about what makes a human, what is humanity, what are the morals of progress and science. Um, and generational trauma is definitely in there. The idea that anything that we create, whether that's art, whether that's a legacy in our own families, or in this case, artificial intelligence, it can only be as moral as the model that it's receiving from its creator. So I think that part of what I wanted to examine and put out into the world as a thing to discuss is that idea of I sign my novellas, Don't Blame the Puppet. So, yeah, like, are we afraid of the technology or are we afraid of the people behind the technology? And I can answer a little bit of both, but mostly the people behind the technology is where we need to focus our attention and our scrutiny.
That would have been a decent alternate title. Don't blame the puppet.
Oh, yeah. That's a
I,
great
I'm
tagline.
I'm wondering if, having done this now, are you thinking about your full-length works a little differently?
Yes, I really am. I think I learned a lot of lessons from this process, both because it was specifically a novella, and so it did challenge me to work in a different form than I was used to, but also because it was my full-length fiction debut. So I think no matter what length you're publishing, you're probably always learning things from that first experience. So I think and I hope, fiercely hope that this novella has and will make me a better novelist. I think I needed to have this experience to figure out how I can write a novel that's going to work. And it might not be as fast paced, it doesn't have to be. But I think actually that is the kind of storyteller I am. So I'm hoping to be able to translate that to novel without exhausting the reader.
Well, just
Um,
as a quick point of interest, if I may, I kind of was interested in just the novella history, and I looked up this particular form goes back to 13th century in Italy. And then it was really big in the 18th century in Germany. And the whole idea was a tight, realistic narrative centered on a single conflict, a sharp turning point, and an ironic or unexpected ending. And I guess, for quite a while in Germany, this size story was quite the popular thing. So there's a real legacy and a history to this length, to this form. It's cool.
And in contemporary horror, it's really having a moment. I mean, horror overall is kind of in its renaissance, I think, and the novella is really popular, and probably for that exact reason that there's a turn or a twist and a surprising ending, which really lends itself well to the horror genre. And
I
maybe
feel like I was gonna say I feel like your ending is very surprising but inevitable, which is probably what makes it feel so satisfying.
Thank you. That I know that's kind of what we strive for, right? Is the ending that feels surprising but inevitable. That it surprised me too. That I guess that's the pro of not outlining. I really did sort of write myself into a corner in the climax scene, and I wanted to destroy everyone and everything in that scene, which would have been permitted in horror. You can do that. Um, and then I just thought, I'm writing about issues that are affecting us as people, as artists right now. And I don't think that all of the bad things are going to go away in one fell swoop. So I wanted to pay homage to what we're all experiencing in the real world in that way. And yet also honor the fairy tale legacy so that when it came to me that, oh my gosh, Rachel, you're writing a fairy tale retelling, you can borrow some of the fairy tale tropes with the ending. It was like, oh, like, thank goodness, because I really did not know how I was going to get out of that climactic scene until it occurred to me, oh, right. There are many ways that fairy tales end. Um, where most of the loose ends are tied up, but there's some room for speculation on what might happen. And I wanted to leave a little bit of room for the reader's imagination with the ending.
Awesome. Now I do have one more pacing question. More so, when I asked you to, if you would like to be our first guest on the podcast, I asked what topic you would feel most comfortable talking about, and pacing was one of them. Um, were there any particular areas when writing this novella, pacing wise, that you felt like you struggled with? Or prior to doing this, did you feel that pacing was as much of a focus in your writing as it was for this project?
I think the second part of your question really, I'm going to have to think about if there were specific parts that I struggled with, but I definitely would not have said prior to this that pacing was something that was a asset of mine or that I really felt like, yeah, I can nail pacing. Like I've got that down. I probably would have said voice was more my comfort zone that I could like, oh, if I'm stuck, I'll just voice my way out of it. And that probably also comes from theater. I was a playwright as well, so relying pretty heavily on dialogue. So I'm definitely comfortable in the dialogue space. So yeah, that is one of the things that this novella taught me, trial by fire, that I better nail pacing. And that was one actually thing that the publisher was very clear about as well. In addition to word count, they were like, we are looking for propulsive reads. This thing better churn and burn. That's what our readers have come to expect. That's what we're looking for here. So I appreciated that they were upfront with me on that. It was not going to be a ponderous, contemplative story.
And I know while you write horror, I know in past you've often your work does lean a lot more literary, which an audience would know that can tend to be a little bit slower. It should always have some level of pacing. But do you feel like that was a challenge then, moving from your more literary voice into something that was like faster paced, or did you enjoy kind of trying out something different?
I think yes to both. It was very different. I did have to counsel myself on sentence more on the line level, I think, than the structure level, especially because Joseph is a scientist and Pinocchio is a robot. So I would get a little bit clunky with my sentences because they would get very intellectual and start talking about, science and technology. And I did research, so I want to make sure the research ends up in the book, right? So that was one of my major um, points to consider when I was editing was, okay, yes, Joseph is very verbose and he can go on and on about his passions and his knowledge, but I can let him do that a couple of times and then I need to move on. The reader understands that he can be that way. Now let's pick up the pace. Um, so I did have to cut some lovely turns of phrase for the sake of pacing. But that's okay. I know what they were. I have them in a separate document if I ever want to use them in some other piece of work. When I teach workshops, I always tell people, don't delete, never delete. Just cut and paste it somewhere else. Because if you think it's beautiful, chances are somebody else is going to think it's beautiful. It just doesn't belong in this piece. But you'd be surprised how many times an author can go back and go, oh, wait a minute, one time I wrote something beautiful and brilliant about
Yep.
clouds. Yeah, and then just pull it from there.
I totally relate to this. I probably have the same number of word counts in other documents that I have cut from my book that I'm actually writing. Like if it's an 80,000 word book, I probably have 80,000 words of cut writing in random documents that are all saved as cut three, cut B, cut whatever.
Join,
100%.
join the club. Yep.
hmm
It's
All
not
right, last
right. Like I'd rather have too many words to say than not enough.
any last little pieces of advice you would offer to a writer who might be struggling with pacing or feeling like their book was sort of slogging through that middle section?
I was going to shout out two craft books that I found helpful, not just for this novella, but just throughout my career. And there's so many that I could mention, but two that I think really specifically address pacing in a helpful way. One is Thrill Me by Benjamin Percy. And recommends doing some kind of, he calls it a suspensometer. So he says, and it looks like a cardiogram where you're making a line. Maybe it's with your pencil, maybe it's thread, whatever is makes your brain happy. And you're going to map out the high points of action and then the quieter moments that might be contemplative scenes, they might be sequels. And that's going to help you sort of gauge where am I risking narrative lag versus just punching my reader relentlessly to the point where they're going to have to stop because they're like, this is too much to process. So, kind of finding a balance between those and breaking up the high action moments with some quieter ones. And the other one is Damn Fine Story by Chuck Wendig.
That's a
And the
good book.
yeah, the way he talks about pacing was really helpful. He says it's just tension and release over and over. That's what pacing is. And how long you hold the tension and how long you hold the release determines the pace. So if you start to pump too fast between tension and release, you can lose your reader's empathy for the character. You have to give them space in the release to care about the character, to care about their emotional reaction to what happened. Um, so that was helpful to me to make sure that while I was super excited to write the next creepy, weird thing that was happening, I did have to let it settle a little bit so that both the reader and the characters could process what was happening.
I just want to say that all that analysis, and I hear echoes of some of the fine analysis you brought and probably are still going to bring to the writers who read podcasts, but you have all that analysis that clear language about structure and pacing and everything else. But when you read it, it's a seamless feeling. There's all that stuff just disappears because the emotional through line is just you're just drawn in. You forget you're reading the whole book. You're not looking for that stuff. It just flows beautifully.
100%.
Thank you. That's the kind of reader I am. I had to realize this about myself recently because I've read a number of books. And no shade, that is a different type of book and a different type of reader, and that's all fine. But there's a kind of meta writer and meta reader where you're really paying attention to the fact that you're reading a piece of art. And I just realized I enjoyed doing that in school, but as a read for pleasure reader, I am an immersive reader. So thank you. It makes my heart happy that I created something that I, as a reader, enjoy.
Yeah.
Uh, it's immersive.
Funny conversation well, one of the reasons I was really excited to talk about pacing with you is because we talked about pacing at length last year because we taught an entire workshop at Colorado Golds on pacing and revisions. So I feel like this was a topic that we had fresh in our minds at least last year. And you're going to be at Colorado Gold presenting again this year, correct?
I am, yes. I have two Thursday intensives, which I have never taught before on Thursday. I'm very excited for that opportunity to get sort of a longer chunk of time with a smaller group of people. I used to teach theater and I'm used to kind of a more intimate group setting like that. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to that. And then I have two workshops during the rest of the weekend. One I am co-teaching with Mira, and one I am co-teaching with Alyssa Lance, who was also a graduate in my MFA program. So the one I'm teaching with her is about homegrown heroes, what writing what you know really means. So that one will be mostly character focused. Um, and then I have to remember what you and I are teaching, Mira, because we've taught so many together.
It's funny. On our last episode, I did the same thing. I don't remember the title, but it is about illusions and adding symbols and symbology and everything to a novel. But
And
yes,
intertextuality,
we
that's
have
what
that workshop nailed down. I see a pool and cocktails in our future where we nail down that workshop.
that happens. Yes.
Yeah. That's great. So I know we can find you at Colorado Gold, obviously. This episode is going to be airing on August 17th. Where else can our listeners find you?
Well, because I am a horror writer, Halloween is my favorite holiday. So we are gearing up for spooky season already. So I'm cooking up all kinds of events through September and October. One that I can announce, I believe, is October 18th. I'll be at Corridor Books, which is a new bookstore in Wheat Ridge, woman-owned bookstore, and she calls herself a weird girl fiction dealer. So, of course, that's totally my love language. So we're going to have a grown-up trick or treat, and it'll be in at the same time as Ritual Craft, if you're familiar with that fantastic witchy store. They have an autumn market, so it'll be the same weekend, and we're going to set up tables, and readers and fans can come by and buy books and get candy and swag and all kinds of fun stuff. So that one's definitely on the books. I have several more things that I'm cooking up that I can't fully announce yet. I will be at the Southern Colorado Women in Horror Festival in March. So if you are looking for a more retreat weekend experience, I highly encourage you to check that out, especially if you're a horror writer, but even any speculative thriller will have stuff for all different kinds of writers.
Awesome. And if a listener wants to pick up PNOKO, where would they go to do that?
It is available wherever books are sold. However, I will champion local bookstores as your first option. So, Corridor, West Side Books, Tattered Cover, and actually Horrid, the horror store that's connected to Scream and Sugar, which is close to the Creepatorium, where our RMFW summer party will be held on Sunday. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I can't go, but I'll be leaving town. But Horrid Horror Store will actually be carrying it as well, which is really cool. They just have a select number of local authors that they carry. I think those are my top local recommendations. There is a new store opening in Arvada in the fall called My Book Cellar, like basement cellar. And they have a pop-up right now. So you can also go to My Book Cellar, the pop-up, and my book is featured in the local author section there. But it will be in the full brick and mortar store in the fall as well.
Sorry, I was giving Mark an entry moment.
No, it's all good.
Um,
This is good.
all right.
This has
That's
been
awesome.
great. Yeah.
It has been great. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Rachel, for coming on. It has been wonderful to chat with you. For our listeners out there, if you haven't registered for the Colorado Gold Conference yet, you can head to rmfw.org to register there. Also, if you are a presenter and you would like to teach more workshops around the Front Range area of Colorado, our education chair is looking for presenters. So do reach out to Anne. If you can go to the rmfw.org website to get more details on that.
This has been really inspiring, Rachel. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the publication of this book. It's just a thrill ride.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for reading, and I admire both of your work so much. So it's always an honor to speak to your mentors and your heroes and friends.
Thank you, Rachel.